Welcome back. We thank you for staying with us on Checkpoint. The Twitter handles to use tonight at KTN News, at Yvonne Okwara, and the hashtag is Checkpoint. If you prefer, you can send us a text message to the number 22155. It is absolutely free to do so. Okay, so my guest tonight, in case you're just joining us, let me reintroduce them once more. On my extreme right is Miguna. Thank you for making the time. Professor Gitile Naituli and Charles Kanjama. I thank you all. Charles, maybe we can start with you. Are we in a crisis? And if so, is it a legal one? Is it a political one? There's been much debate with all of the events we've seen from the 1st of September and everything that's happened, you know, in the courts and outside of the courts as well. Where are we right now?
Yvonne, I think we are in a crisis. I think Kenyans can see clearly that a big chunk of the country is not ready to go by the directions of the institutions that are managing the electoral process. There's been a major loss of confidence in the IEBC. Some people don't want to participate in the elections, and to add to that, actually want to engage in acts of sabotage, which are against the Election Offences Act, but they believe they are doing the right thing. That, to me, is a definition of crisis, when the credibility of our laws and institutions is in doubt, is in question. And I think this crisis can be resolved in several means, including through the law and order method, for example, asking the Supreme Court to rule on the matter, through the political method of asking the leaders to
sit down.
Definitely there's a crisis.
We will come back and talk about what the solutions possibly are. Miguna, do you think we're in a crisis?
Oh, there are two huge crises. There is the constitutional crisis and there is the political crisis. You see, the definition of a crisis is when the established laws and processes cannot solve the problem. Right now, the Supreme Court issued an order that elections be conducted in strict adherence to the Constitution and the applicable laws. In other words, that you do a free, fair, transparent, credible, and verifiable elections. That entails that all the problems that existed on August 8th and afterwards should have been corrected. The KIMS kits, the server should have been opened and audited independently. Those who perpetrated the perversion of the Constitution and bungled the election should have either stepped aside or been dealt with. And the political process, the political players, particularly the government, ought to have adhered to the laws that are existing in the land. As you can see, the IEBC is both unable and unwilling to do anything to solve the problem. President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are threatening us every day and butchering particularly Luos in a way that is clearly textbook definition of ethnic cleansing. So yes, we have a huge crisis, but its resolution may not be palatable to a lot of people, but it will be resolved, not by the October 26th election, which I contend is not an election.
Okay.
It's a coronation ritual.
All right, and that's an interesting one you mentioned, and we'll come back and touch on that, on whether the election that is slated for 10 days from now will solve all of these, you know.
It's not an election.
Just like that, okay. But he's mentioned something interesting, which is, you know, the dramatic, chaotic scenes we have seen with respect to the demonstrations in various parts of the country. And, you know, a community feeling targeted. You are a commissioner within the Cohesion and Integration Commission. What have been your thoughts of what we have seen so far, police action? You know, we've just run a story of a man who's got 6 bullets lodged in his body.
Yeah, I think first what we have seen is not really good. And doesn't speak much about national cohesion. We saw where some Kenyan decided to run in the middle of a crowd and knock people in a vehicle. That person is not in custody right now. He ought to be in custody. So we think the politicians are in the process of creating a crisis, because I don't agree quite with my colleagues that we're in deep into the crisis. It can still be
How would you
saved.
describe it?
The situation can still be saved if the primary contestants can have a dialogue and they talk about this issue, because what is pertaining right now is a situation where they are not respecting one another, where I don't think the other party matters. And in that kind of a situation, it's very clear that the crisis can now come and mushroom and get out of control, because there is always the idea that you can create a situation and control it, and then it mutates, and then you are not able to control it. And this is why reasonable people are saying, please talk. People don't talk to their friends. They talk to the people they disagree with, so that the disagreement is sorted out. So the idea that you can't discuss, it doesn't tell much about how we are able to solve our problems within this situation. So we're in the process of creating the crisis. We are not yet deep into it.
Okay. That's an interesting one.
I find it ridiculous that the professor who supposedly works for a national cohesion and integration commission does not see a crisis when kindergarten kids are harassed and basically beaten up. When I have a 10-year-old being butchered by armed police and vigilantes in civilian clothing, when we have, as of now, more than 100 shots, basically people demonstrating, exercising their rights, where we have a president gone rogue who is threatening the judiciary, threatening the other side. They are not campaigning. What President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are doing is not a campaign. This is a boastful, despotic outpouring of threats and brutal bestiality against the people of Kenya. Totally unacceptable in a republic, totally unacceptable in a constitutional democracy. And so you know why we are here. Because people like my friend are put there, but they're not interested in doing their job. They are interested in earning a salary, then giving us platitudes. Because right now, they should have been doing something.
Okay.
Let me tell you the major problem here. I saw some people there talking, saying that there should be talks between President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. Will talks open up the servers and audit them? Will talks open up the KIMS kits and make sure that it has not been configured to rig an election? Will talks deal with those who bungled the election, those who forged the forms, those who altered results? Will talks make Al Ghurair not print fake forms with no security features? Will talks ensure that elections are conducted in strict adherence of the Constitution? So this is a joke.
Okay.
Yvonne, I just want to say something.
Because I'd like us to bring in Charles now.
I want to say something. The risk and the danger we are running into in handling positions is that the voices of reason are going to be suppressed and suppressed. In a situation like this, you would expect the church in front because it's neutral. You see, what happened in Rwanda before the genocide is the Mberibiana government whipped up emotions so high that at the end, when he decided he actually wanted to compromise, the story is that it is actually his own people who shot him down because they didn't want the compromise, because he had whipped emotions to levels that compromise now, according to them, became impossible.
All right, Prof.
So with all what is happening, what
one
you
of the
would
voices of reason could be the commission in which you said.
Yes, I agree. And this is what, so what I'm saying is that the emotions are high. I think the time has come we cool them down. The idea of these people having a dialogue is that it can lead to all the things my brother Miguna is talking about.
It's already happening.
It can lead to opening.
The butchering is already happening. They're butchering.
But I'm saying, you said can it lead to opening the servers? Yes, it can. Can it lead to stopping the butchering he's talking about? Yes, it can.
Okay, so you agree that talks could be a solution to the issues that he's raising. Charles, what do you think?
I think, Yvonne, the NASA side has requested for talks on several occasions. The Jubilee side has been wary about those talks because they've been thinking that these talks will morph into some form of coalition government discussions. I think there has to be a way in which you can have some talks while taking care of the concerns of both sides. And I think Miguna has mentioned some of the concerns of NASA. They don't just want talks that don't bear fruit. They're just to placate them without having effective changes. I think there could be some talks, but I don't personally think the approach where you set demands about the talks or even who should be there, how the discussion should take place before they begin is a good way to go about it. So there are various forums possible for talks. IEBC tried to organize some, it didn't succeed. Parliament tried to organize some, it didn't succeed. There could be all kinds of formal or informal talks. The church leaders could be involved. But I think there's also room for the institutions created by the Constitution to bring in sanity and the authoritative voice. Clearly, IEBC on its own cannot do so.
Yeah.
My view, Yvonne, is that in the year 2012, in December, the Supreme Court gave a decision in an advisory opinion, and I took part in that case, in which they said that the role of the Supreme Court under Article 140 of the Constitution is not only to get involved after a president-elect has been declared, that the Supreme Court can get involved in other stages of the process, because they said elections is a process, not an event, can get involved in other stages of the process. It is the decision of the Supreme Court that said go to election after 60 days, within 60 days. It was on the basis of the reading of the Constitution, Article 143. It's again the Supreme Court in 2013 that came up with this hypothetical situation of somebody abandoning the quest, which has been interpreted, rightly or wrongly, as being the same thing as withdrawing at any time before the election. Why can't somebody go to the Supreme Court on Monday, and instead of the Supreme Court doing what they did to Ekuru Court's application, which was dismissed summarily, they take into account their own jurisprudence of 2012, the advisory opinion, and they sit and give an authoritative opinion. They could actually consider three views, and I don't call it an opinion, more like an application where they give a verdict on three issues. One, on the question of Ekuru Court's admission and the other 5 candidates, is it valid? Number 2, on the question of Raila Odinga's withdrawal through a letter, is it valid? And number 3, should the elections continue on 26th of October, or is there scope for extending them based on any of those decisions? If the Supreme Court that has asked for fresh elections is able to answer these questions authoritatively, it has some more credibility than IEBC at this stage, at least to NASA side, which is the one that is most aggrieved by the 26th October elections. Then we may be going somewhere. So I believe we need an approach where you can have some talks, some discussions, but you also need to engage the constitutional structures and processes that have the wherewithal, the power, the jurisdiction to resolve this conundrum. Because you can imagine, if the Supreme Court said on Wednesday or Thursday, we are going for an election, then they would give credibility to that process. If on the other hand, they said, extend the period for 2 months, for example, then it would create a sense of calm in the country and enable us to avoid these heightened street battles and everyone trying to do one upmanship over the other person.
Yeah, but I think perhaps the issue at hand right now is following the annulment of this election on the 1st of September, that, it all rests with the IEBC and whether we've got 2 months, 6 months, 2 days. Do you believe, Miguna, that it is the IEBC that can solve the problem that we're in? Where do we look to? Because Charles is saying we could go to the Supreme Court and they could perhaps give some direction and help calm down the tension in the country. Could it be IEBC?
You see, Yvonne, if you listen to President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, they are not campaigning. They are telling Matiang'i to nyorosha watu. He's telling Matiang'i to continue brutalizing, suppressing, and killing and maiming civilians, Kenyan citizens. That's not the language of a person who is looking for votes. That's a person who has discarded the Constitution and is ready to take power as a strong man. That is a despot speaking. So President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto have become despots. Two, the IEBC is no longer an independent electoral body. It is a branch of Jubilee Party. That is what the IEBC is. The independent there does not stand for IEBC. It no longer exists. It does not make its own decisions. It has not taken any step, not one. If I asked you, Yvonne, since September 1, when the Chief Justice and his fellow justices ordered the IEBC to conduct election in strict adherence of the Constitution and the law, what one thing have they done in compliance? Not one. They did not do it with OT Safamorpho. They did not do it with Al Gorea. They did not do it with the servers. They did not do it with Kim's Kids. They have not done it with the forms. They have not done it with their employees. They have not done it with anything. Even when they ordered, and I say ordered because it was a directive, when they said that the presidential candidates should come before them for a meeting, only Raila Odinga appeared there with his running mate and his colleagues. Uhuru Kenyatta never appeared. No censure. They did not act as an independent institution. They went ahead and met with William Ruto. William Ruto is not a candidate. He's not a presidential candidate. Go further. They have been writing letters and memos. Not one of them has been implemented. So Chebukati wrote a memo that was widely circulated and widely debated and discussed in the media. Was there a response? We have not seen it. Transparency would have dictated and accountability that they published it. Have we seen, we've seen media like yourselves invite Cheloba for interviews. The man is full of himself. The man thinks is the best thing that came to the world after sliced bread. He struts like a peacock. So who is giving him the confidence and the power that you are seeing him exude? It is the presidency. The presidency has declared that they are going to protect Cheloba and his group that messed up the elections. So they have to do nothing. So here is it. This is where we are. There is a crisis. It cannot be fixed in the next 1 week when election or two, that elections are scheduled. When Chebukati announced that the Right Honorable Raila Odinga and Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta were going to run for the presidency, they disobeyed a court order. The court said, do this in accordance with the Constitution. How did they pick the two when the results on which they could have relied on, even if they were relying on the 2013 decision of the Supreme Court, how did they pick number one and number two when the results had been invalidated? So they couldn't do that. Then recently, when they now said we are expanding it to 8 people, how did they make that decision? How did they communicate to the individuals? Telephone calls. But when the Right Honorable Prime Minister withdraws, they say they need a form. They have not done anything by using any form. So what you see here is an institution that does not understand the law, that does not seem to understand the Constitution, that is out of its depth. They cannot conduct a credible election. So what I'm saying is that IEBC is no longer an independent institution.
All right.
It is a branch of Jubilee.
Okay, Miguna, you'd like to step in and then we can speak to
Let me just say that somebody said, in Africa there is no natural disasters except the ones we create ourselves. When the court nullified that election, this was sensible people should have done. We spent a lot of money. Somebody ought to have been accountable for that nullification. And those people to be held accountable was the people who are supposed to see that the election went through and they went through properly. That did not happen. And if that doesn't happen, we spend all those in billions and nobody is accountable for that mistake, then you can be sure what we are doing now is building on our already existing mistake. So we are too busy magnifying something that we should have sorted out when the problem appeared. Now, this is what I, as a natural person, what I expected to see, because Jubilee said they won the election. So I thought they should be more angry than NASA. Somebody actually messed up their election. So they should have gone after those people much more even than in NASA. So what I'm saying is people need to slow down, cool down, remove the emotions. We have a problem here. Let's separate the problem from the people. Because we are not separating now. We are saying the problem is Uhuru or is Raila. We will not be able to solve it. We need to set the problem separate from both of them, and then we have a look at it.
And what do you think is the problem, Charles? What would be your assessment of how IEBC has conducted itself since the 1st of September?
Yvonne, I think one of the unfortunate consequences of the elections that took place and the nullification is there has been heightened bashing of constitutional institutions. And this affects both sides. We've seen the Jubilee side bashing the Supreme Court viciously. We've seen consistent and repeated bashing of IEBC by the NASA side. And even Miguna, a few minutes ago, has been bashing IEBC. What happens when institutions are bashed is that even when they try to do the right thing, you are not ready to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think it was today in both the daily papers of nationwide circulation that they gave a long explanation of how they've tried to deal with the irreducible minimums of NASA. And when you look at it from an objective perspective, you can say they've made an effort. It's not true that they've done nothing. Actually, they've done a lot to try and build the confidence. But unfortunately, because of the bashing of IEBC, the bashing of the Supreme Court and so on, these institutions that the Constitution had put in place to resolve differences of opinion or of legal interpretation look like they have lost legitimacy or credibility. My concern, Yvonne, is this. If these institutions totally lose credibility because of the actions of the two major political actors and their followers, then this constitution that we bequeathed to ourselves only 7 short years ago will basically be in tatters. And it would be a real shame that the champions of the new constitution are the very architects of the downfall of the constitution. So I think they need to have some sober minds. I don't think if you are to talk eye to eye, face to face to Raila Odinga or to Uhuru Kenyatta, they would be ready to be to be blamed and to be the cause of the collapse of the constitution that only 7 years ago they were in the process of bringing to birth. So I think it is unfortunate, and their acts of political brinkmanship are going beyond the edge of the cliff. And for me, I therefore support strengthening institutions. It's not Kenya is not the only country.
IEBC,
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Kenya is not the only country that faces political crisis around election time. Look at United States of America. There was many people who disagreed with the election of Donald Trump. In fact, the majority did not even vote for him in actual numbers. And yet, based on the electoral system, he was the elected person. They went to the streets, but they held peaceful protests. And the police managed the protests without violating the rights and integrity and liberty of the protesters. So both sides were responsible. They could have gone to court like they did in 2000 with Bush versus Gore and respect the decision of the Supreme Court. What you find, and this has happened in so many countries, what you find in Kenya is that when the rubber meets the road, nobody is ready to walk the talk.
Okay.
And I think what we need to do as civil society or those people who are not at the heart of this political contestation is to insist that the institutions that we created, because this constitution is ours, it's not for the politicians alone, it's for all of us. Those institutions should be moved, should give direction, and their direction should be respected. And if you don't trust IEBC, for goodness sake, go to the Supreme Court or to the High Court.
Okay. We really must take a break.
Give me a minute, please. I can't contain myself because of my friend Kanjama's platitudes. It is horrible platitude. And remember, I want to remind my friend Kanjama, he opposed the Constitution. Kanjama was part of William Ruto's secretariat. I want to finish. Kanjama was part of William Ruto's secretariat. So when he pretends to be neutral, that is the height of dishonesty. Number two, we want to be honest with ourselves. Institutions are nothing but things. Like saying standard group, it's a thing. The things, what makes an institution breathe are the people inside the institution. So if you find that people inside the institution have lost credibility and legitimacy because they committed crimes or they committed immoral things, and then you are saying we respect them. You see, there is a difference. No, let me just finish. There is a difference, a big
minute,
difference.
I promise to give
please, just 1 minute. There is a big difference between the Supreme Court that did not do anything wrong. It made a decision. It rendered a decision. Now, the IEBC bungled an election. So why would you want similar treatment between a criminal who bungled an election and committed illegalities and one that obeyed the law?
All right, Mr. Miguna.
Yes.
Because it's made a personal attack against.
It's not a personal attack, it's the truth.
First of all, it is totally... No, I need to respond before
Please do this before we take the break.
You see, Miguna loves what you call ad hominem arguments. Ad hominem means...
Is it false or
when
true?
you find... I'm going to answer.
When
you find the kitchen is too hot, you start attacking the cooks in the kitchen. That's what he's doing. So, for example, he stated something that is totally false. I'll ask him to withdraw on air. That was a member of a secretariat of William Ruto. Totally false. And if
did you oppose the Constitution or not?
If Miguna respects truth,
did you oppose the Constitution or not?
Okay, Mr. Miguna, please.
No, I would like Mr. Kajama to confirm
Mr. Miguna,
that he supported or opposed the Constitution.
Mr. Miguna, please.
Okay, fine.
Institutions is people, but you have to respect those institutions because they've been created by the Constitution.
Okay.
If you disagree with them,
All right, that's a break that we have to take right